Hello, uh, my name is Gianluca Brunori. I am professor at University of Pisa. Today I would like to speak you about social innovation. But in order to understand what social innovation is, I would like to start with the concept of innovation. What is innovation? We can say that innovation is the solution of problems for which existing remedies don't work. And what is a problem? A problem can be articulated in different aspects. We have artifacts, so things, for example. We have actors, so people who use these things. And we have rules, so rules on how to put together artifacts and things. If we consider these three aspects together, we have what we call social-technical systems. And this may cause some problems. If something doesn't work, we have a problem. So, in order to use in a good way artifacts and to solve this problem, we have to change something. And so we can say that innovation is a change in socio-technical systems as a response to a problem. Then we can consider social innovation. Social innovation is innovation that responds to social problems. What are social problems? For example, we can have a social problem. For example, a social problem linked to other social problems. For example, social exclusion. If there is somebody excluded by a group, this creates problem for the group and for the person excluded itself. And this is a social problem. Then we have social ecological problems. Social problems related to ecological aspects. For example, vulnerability to climate change. When there is climate change, this disrupts the life of people, and so people becomes more vulnerable. We have socio-economic problems. For example, unemployment is a typical socio-economic problem, so generated by economic aspect. Or we can have socio-technological aspects. For example, technological illiteracy produce these qualities, and people is disadvantaged because they cannot use technology. When we come to rural areas, we have a lot of social problems. For example, in the rural areas there are isolation. So people isolated because they are geographically isolated. Rural people in most of the cases have a lack of voice. So they can't give their voice in the places where decisions are made. There are lack of services because the number of people sometimes is too little to justify economically the delivery of services. Rural areas are aging because there are the prevalence of old people. There are lack of opportunities for young people, so they tend to get out from rural areas. And rural areas have the problem of abandonment of economic activity or other kind of activities, and this brings to territorial degradation. So we have a lot of social problems in rural areas, and at the same time in rural areas we have in general lack of resources. So financial resources, economic resources, but also other types of resources. And this is the way to consider the importance of social innovation. we can define social innovation as new products, services and interaction models that satisfy at the same time social needs and create new social resources. So we can see two aspects: social needs and social resources. When we solve social problems, we can say that we create social value. So creation of value related to the solution or contribution to solution of social problems. And you can find a long list of social problems that brings to social value. For example, equity, justice, public goods, sustainability, resilience, solidarity, social integration, connectivity, self-sufficiency, occupation. All of this can be considered social value. When there is an innovation that brings these values, we can say that we have increased the social value of a territory. And the social values works as you can see here in this picture. There is a transaction between A and B, two actors of an economic activity, but the outcome, the impact of their transaction goes beyond A and B. So, for example, it goes to C. C benefits from this transaction between A and B, and this brings to increased social value. But then we have seen that social innovation is also production of social resources. So what is a social resources? We can say that social resource is the capacity of doing things through social interaction. If we have an objective, resources help us to reach, to fulfill some outcomes. So we are doing things through social interaction. And what kind of resources can social interaction produce? For example, mental schemes. If there is a new mental schemes, the capacity to see things in different ways, this is an innovation, and this innovation brings to capacity to doing things in different ways. So we can have trust, new rules, new practices, social configurations, symbolic capital, so the capacity to get something visible to others, participation, social entrepreneurships. So all of these things are social resources. For example, mental schemes. We can consider reality as part of what is lived, so doing things practically, but in order to do things we need to know things, and this belongs to what we consider perceived reality. But at the same time we know according to what we think in general or what we have learned in the past. And this is part of we can consider conceived reality. So lived, perceived and conceived are three aspects of reality. If we change, for example, the way we conceive reality, we will change the way we perceive our reality, so how we know our reality, and then how we live, we act on reality. And this is an example, biodiversity. Biodiversity, as you know, is used into practice. But sometimes we don't know what biodiversity is. We simply use it. So when we consider that biodiversity is a local resource, so we start to identify different things and the role and the use of different things, we can recognize biodiversity during daily life. So the capacity to recognize biodiversity brings to their differential use. and this becomes a local resource. So as long as we are able to increase our capacity to distinguish biodiversity, we have a resource because we can turn biodiversity into practice, for example, into food or into pharmaceutical, etc. Another example is waste. Waste is waste because it's something that is not used. But if we consider that what we abandon can be reused for other things, we have a different way of understanding waste. So in the end, waste becomes something useful, and waste becomes a resource. So again, in this case, we have a mental schemes that changes our meaning of waste into something useful. And the capacity to create a new resource is related to the capacity of using something that is useless, it was useless, into something that is useful. So, to bring to a conclusion, we can say that social innovation creates resources, and especially it creates what we call social capital. So a stock of resources based on the capacity of people to collaborate. The example is the use of traditional values. Traditional values in most of the cases bring to social capital, for example, a capacity of people to help each other. But sometimes traditional values are also those aspects that maintain a kind of status quo. So they are very helpful, but at the same time they can bring stability in a system. They avoid change. But in a new situation, traditional values through social innovation can be linked to new values. So tradition is linked to innovation, and this brings to new social capital. So existing social capital is mobilized to other purposes, and instead of status quo, it brings change. And we have a lot of examples in the agri-food sector when tradition is something that is used as a kind of innovation in relation with modern food. And this brings the capacity of local territories to propose a product with a strong local identity that can be sold elsewhere to people who is appreciating this product. And this brings to accumulation of social capital. So we have social innovation, and whenever social innovation operates, this increases social capital. But at the same time, we can use social capital to generate social innovation. When we turn to the model we have seen before, this link between lived, perceived and conceived, we can see that practice can see as a routine behavior that involve again artifacts, rules and actors. And when we change rules, we can change the way we do things. So we can have a lot of innovative practices that help us getting out of conventional schemes. For example, we can consider sustainable production, so doing things sustainably instead of polluting. Sustainable consumption, changing consumption habits, alternative market channels that bring more added value to farmers, non-commercial exchange when there are resources that are not easy to market, but they can exchange within a community. Or, for example, sharing resources. lot of social innovation is based on sharing, something that instead of exchanged commercially, it's shared and brings to new social resources. For example, sustainable consumption. In the sustainable consumption, we have new mental schemes that says what is sustainable and what is not, new relations, for example, new suppliers, consumer that share experiences, a new instrument, for example, the shopper, the boxes to be reused, or new models of social interaction, for example, new family roles. So this aspect shows that in order to bring what we call sustainable consumption, which is a social innovation, we need to change a lot of different things, and these things together brings to a new configuration and new practice. Thank you for your attention.